Well, good afternoon. Welcome back to the Middle East Smart Construction Virtual Summit, and welcome to the final panel of the day. And we're moving in this panel from smart construction to smart cities. So this is the space where urban planning meets infrastructure, meets technology, meets people. One of the most important megatrends, certainly from the point of view of engineering and society, one of the most important megatrends shaping the world we live in is the growing urbanization of society. People moving to cities, and nowhere is this more sort of accentuated than in the Middle East and North Africa, and particularly in the Gulf region. This is great. This urbanization is great for all sorts of reasons. Energy efficiency, economic growth, all sorts of things like that, but it raises lots and lots of challenges. The stress of everyone living in a close environment, congestion on the roads, the economic problems of uncontrolled urban sprawl. These are massive challenges. So our objective as governments, as societies, is to make our cities more resilient, more sustainable, more efficient, higher functioning, and happier. So the question is, how do we do that? And that is the point of this panel. And I'm absolutely delighted. We've got such a good group of panelists to join us today. And I do encourage you all to send in your questions or make your points, because it's a very, very top-end panel. So in alphabetical order, we have Havoy Sindrich. Now, Havoy is the Middle East urbanism leader for Arup, the engineering consultancy. Mohammed Shah, who you won't see on your screens at the moment, he's dialing and he's having some problems with his video, but Mohammed will be with us in a moment. Mohammed is the IT and Smart City Director for Knowledge Economic City in Saudi Arabia. Martin Tillman is the Director for Strategic Transport Planning and Advisory at AECOM, one of the world's biggest multidisciplinary consultancies, and Dr. Ghassan Ziadat, who is the Vice President for Major Projects, Capital Projects and Infrastructure at McKinsey & Company. So a fantastic panel. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, yes, good afternoon.
Excellent. That's the start. I'm going to come to you, Ghassan, first. You know, McKinsey, well, I'm sure all of your companies have done big studies in the area of smart cities, but I certainly know McKinsey's done one recently. I guess the dumb question is, how smart are our cities? You know, I talked about the rapid pace of urbanization in the Middle East and particularly in the Gulf. Are our cities able to cope? You know, how smart are we?
Yes, thanks very much, Richard. And at McKinsey Global Institute, we've researched the performance of cities around the globe, about 50 cities, and about their performance with in respect to how smart they are. And what we found is that the main takeaways from that is that basically smart cities can be evaluated in 3 layers. One is, if you like, the layer of technology, smartness in terms of technology base, and then in terms of the applications which are introduced to the city's residents, and then the adoption of the residents, the public adoption of those technologies and those applications. And the good news is that cities in the Middle East, particularly those in the Gulf, such as Abu Dhabi and Dubai, have fared fairly well. They're, in fact, among some of the top performers globally in terms of smartness and in terms of all these three different dimensions.
Is that for the obvious reason that they are relatively new and young cities, and so they're being built to with more modern needs in mind, whereas centuries-old cities have to be sort of retrofitted? Is that why Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Riyadh are doing well?
Yes, it's multiple factors. I think the fact that the infrastructure is mostly modern, as you rightly mentioned, and second is that they are focused on technology, and there are initiatives such as Smart Dubai and Abu Dhabi where the government is gone electronic, and also on the reflection of the young population. And the fact that the population is fairly well connected and hardwired to the infrastructure that the government is invested in.
Well, that's an interesting question. I was going to put this one to Havoy, but seeing as you brought it up, is a smart city, is this about bending the city to the behavior of the people, or is it about changing the way people behave to make the city function better? You know, and you mentioned young people there. That implies to me that actually the behavior of the people is quite important to making a smart city work. So that was for you, Ghassan, just on the.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, it is definitely. I mean, the main thing to bear in mind is that technology is a means to an end, and you know, the smartness is a means to an end, and it's really the main aim of investing in this technology is to improve the life of citizens, improve the quality of life, improve the livability of the city, and also the sustainability and resilience of the city. And so by making the technology available, by educating and investing in the population, you basically help improve the quality of life and improve people's, if you like, livability, etc. And the good news is that although that we were faring quite well, what we found also is that if you like, the potential for improvement is another sort of 60 to 70% that we haven't achieved yet. So although we're one of the top achievers, the potential for improving quality of life and livability and resilience, etc., through technology is still quite immense. And what we've also found is that, you know, investing in these smart technologies and adoption can improve the quality of life indicators by somewhere between 10 and 30%. And we can talk about that later, the different dimensions of that improvement.
Ghassan, just actually, before I move on, you mentioned at the beginning of your comments there about research by the McKinsey Institute. Is that public domain? Can people get hold of that?
Yes, it is. We can share, if you like, after the session later, some of our publications on this, which are available in the public domain.
Okay, thank you. And just on that, so for everyone joining us today, this platform will remain open for 24 hours after the end of this panel, so you can carry on networking and sharing information up until 3 o'clock UAE time tomorrow. Okay, thanks, Ghassan. Havoy, just on following on from that point there, I was quite intrigued by this idea that having a younger population makes a city smarter. I mean, that's paraphrasing Ghassan there, but so how much is this about the way we behave as people, and how much is it about changing our cities?
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to put that, and yeah, very interesting way to look at it. And I think that, you know, 100% the kind of penetration of smartphones in the region makes it really easy. And I think that probably there is an element to the diversity of the population that kind of makes it easier for you know, apps to penetrate. I always refer to the population here as very happy, right? Everybody's very quickly to take on these things. And I think that when we're talking about the, you know, some of these applications that are coming through that are making life easier, I just renewed my 10-year UAE driving license, and I think back what it was like 10 years ago versus my renewal. It's incredible that the kind of change in there. In terms of youngness of the city, I think there is probably something to, you know, the established systems. So if you were to look at some other cities that have been, you know, in existence for millennia and have been governed in a certain way, I think that this is obviously a distinct advantage that the cities in the Middle East have, or in the Gulf, that have grown so dramatically, so quickly, that have kind of employed some of these systems. I think that in terms of the behavior, I think that that's a very interesting point, because I would go to say that our cities, the Middle Eastern cities, have got quite a long way to go to be designed better and to be designed more suitable. And Ghassan, you mentioned quality of life. Of course, that is something that's close to my heart, something that I work on day to day. And I think there we have got a long way to go in terms of how technology can help us to actually, make people choose more sustainable, healthier behavioral patterns. And I think that's something that's going to be specific to the Middle East that we have to work out. I think that absolutely in terms of smartness, the amounts of analog systems that have been digitized in the last couple of years and the ability of things that you can do is incredible. It really is. But I think that we have got this whole other big chunk of city to sort out, which is pretty much linked to behavior, as you would say, Richard.
And is it what's your feeling on the key driver here? Is it climate change and the targets reducing the carbon footprint of cities and increasing energy efficiency, or is it economics? Is it about getting our roads and our transport systems to function more efficiently and to help economic growth? Or is it something else? Is it security or happier society? What are the most important drivers here?
Look, I would think that efficiency of infrastructure is something that I would expect is increasingly coming onto the agenda, because I would like to think that some of the stuff that's being built these days isn't necessarily going to be sustainable financially or let alone environmentally in 20, 30 years' time. So I think that I would like to think that there's a lot of push in that direction, and better use of energy is always a good thing. I think there's and I have said this before also to you, Richard, I think that what I find quite interesting is that, there is almost like this Maslow's hierarchy of needs that cities have just as much as everybody has, that societies have. So I like to liken the Middle East now to kind of 1990s Europe, whereas, post-war Europe was all about reconstruction. It's really about getting it in, accommodating the people that we have, really this big boom that we have, versus the time that I believe that we're entering now in the Middle East. What Europe has been doing for the last 20 years is kind of fine-tuning their cities. It's kind of working on what is really going to help us to improve the cities and what is really going to help us to kind of bring up that quality of life. I think that's just, climate change is a big issue. You might have seen the headlines a couple of years ago that it will be too hot to live in the Middle East. I think that for us in the coastal cities, it's more about the actual humidity. That's the killer rather than the heat. But I think that if we can work and establish a system and establish cities, through the use of technology, through the use of actually modeling things before monitoring things, then I think that should be a massive driver of why we're actually investing into these systems.
On to Martin. One question that just crossed my mind as you were talking is about what we've seen through COVID. So, the past 10 months, we've had so much change and it's been talked about, the working from home or the logistics disruption, food security, all these issues have become, top of the agenda. Has that changed our thinking on, smart cities? Has it accelerated things? Has it exposed weaknesses that we didn't know about? How have things changed, do you think, in the past 10 months?
Oh, look, I think, and this is what everybody's talking about, the adoption is just there, right? I think that I personally am the person that likes to see his fruit before he buys it, but through this, for example, very much so, I, like everybody else, have really become accustomed to online shopping. But I think that the COVID crisis, and this is maybe a little bit, taking it aside from the smartness, but more to the quality of life, is that a lot of people have really had that first-hand experience, what it means like that if they're in immediate neighborhoods, their immediate districts, quarters do not provide what they actually need for their day-to-day lives. And I think that's one of those things where, again, technology can help us to kind of make the case for certain investments that will then hopefully bring up the quality of life.
Much, Havoy. Now, if anyone has questions for Anne or Havoy or any of our panelists, Martin or Mohammed, when he's able to join us, send in your questions using the stage tab on the right-hand side of the screen, and I will field your questions to the panelists. Now, Martin, if I can come to you, so you are a strategic transport planner, an urban planner. How has your job changed in the context of you know, your clients wanting smart cities and I guess the population expecting smart cities. How has that changed your job over 5 years, and as following on from that point about COVID over the last 10 months?
I think my first point actually is sort of in response to the other panelists here as well, and I think I want to just start by saying if a city is trying to be livable, if a city is trying to be happier, then by going down the smart route, that is not the answer. Smart is a tool that can help you to achieve that, but it is not the only answer to do that. Now, for me, the smart city, the first thing that we need to focus on is, what are we trying to achieve by doing that? And for me, the number one is the collaboration. And we talked about making it a young collaboration versus an old collaboration. One example I wanted to use was the Transport for London. Transport for London opened up its data. So Transport for London is essentially the public transport operator for London. It opened up its data set. It didn't charge for that data. It allowed a cottage industry to form from that release of the data that allowed different app makers and different computer programmers.
When was this?
This was probably, that's a good question, probably about 5 years ago, I think now. Because I remember listening to somebody from TfL talking about it, and I was thinking what a great initiative this was to bring forward. I would say 5 years max, this has been going on. But you'll see the fruits of it. There are plenty of apps that have been released now in London that are based on that data set. And Dubai has also moved down that route. It's releasing data to developers to allow that data to be used. So for me, that is a great step forward. But that doesn't make you a livable city. It doesn't make you a happier city. It just means that your citizens can be better informed of public transport, for example. The biggest changes, and you can use Abu Dhabi as an example here with the Urban Planning Council. They took the city centre, which had that grid-like system, and it had these very gentle radius turns, which are all suited for private vehicles. And what that meant was that cars were going very fast around the corners at the expense of pedestrians who had to rush across. If you go down to Abu Dhabi city centre now, you'll see that that's all changed. They've actually widened the footways. They've tightened up the radius for those turns to allow it the cars have to go much slower around those corners, whereas pedestrians have much shorter times to cross over and with less fast vehicles. So I think it's simple changes sometimes that are the most effective. Smart is good, but it's sometimes something very simple and minimalistic that can make a big difference on how a city is perceived and how people can access.
So can I just ask, sort of going back to my question originally and the point you just made about the design of pavements, and so how has your job as an urban planner become more about, I thought you were going to tell me it's much more about technology and that sort of thing, but it sounds like actually you're saying it's not. It's still about, the sort of interaction of people and things.
Absolutely. Most of my work is actually at the master planning scale, so it's much more strategic than individual developments. But clearly, yeah, there's a push to make sure that there is enough capacity for cars and private vehicles. But at the same time, there's a realization. I mean, I would say 9 times out of 10, I'm being asked to push up the public transport mode share, and what measures can I put in to encourage use of public transport? And then I always say, well, look, let's not forget about the walking and cycling. The number one reason was the safety. How safe do I feel cycling in the city? Do I have access to a bicycle? Do I have access to facilities at the other end of my journey? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. You don't feel safe and you don't have those facilities. So again, simple changes, not costly, that can make a big difference in how a city is perceived. I mean, if you look at the most livable cities in the world, these cities have got those measures off pat. They've got the safety in there, they've got the secure measures in there, they've got the facilities in place.
I have questions. We've already got some questions coming in. Please continue to send them in and I will field them to the panel as we go. Ghassan, if I can come back to you, I know that you've got some statistics on this. What are the sort of, how do we measure the success, or what are the potential benefits of smart cities? You know, how can we quantify why we want to do this?
Yeah, there are hundreds of KPIs, hundreds of performance indicators that we've looked at all the different dimensions, you know, economics, economic impact, the engagement of the citizen with the government and the state, as well as the infrastructure and everything else that we've mentioned. And we also looked at how these, how being a smart or technologically enabled, how it impacts these parameters. You know, what sort of improvements can we expect by investing? And you know, there are things like, for example, reducing fatalities by 8 to 10% through managing the traffic better, or an accelerated emergency response, you know, through being better connected. And that you can improve emergency response by up to 25, 35% by investing in the technology and connecting the emergency services and civil defense with the citizens. You can also shape the average commute, you know, about transport planning by a good 15 to 20% by having better information so that people can time their trips, etc., to suit, and lowering the disease burden. You know, we've seen how the impact of COVID-19. Now, this really highlights the importance that, you know, being a smart city is not a goal, but a means to an end effectively. The entire point is to be able to respond more effectively and more dynamically to the evolving needs of citizens, you know, especially in situations like epidemics and their desires and of society as a whole. The technology is simply a tool that will help optimize in terms of CapEx, and to optimize our infrastructure and OpEx, the resources that we put in, and the spaces that they share. So we can also cut, you know, make it more, the cities more sustainable by cutting greenhouse gas emissions through better traffic management or through better consumption in terms of water and electricity. You know, Dubai and Abu Dhabi have invested in having smart meters in their networks for water, for power, and citizens can see how much they're spending, how much you know, power they're consuming, how much water, and it helps them to manage all their consumption and reduce you know, greenhouse emissions as a result of that.
On that point then, so I mean, firstly, you mentioned some statistics there. Are those theoretical statistics, or are those empirically derived from research that you've done?
This is from research that we've done on a number of cities. You know, and the cities are very different, of course, globally. Some of the cities have very large populations, large densities. Some of them are very well-established cities in terms of infrastructure and the urban realm, and the population profiles are very different. You know, there's, if you like, the young populations you have, for example, places like Korea, Singapore, Dubai, etc., where what we call them technology natives, the population, you know, the young populations are already, you know, they were born with handheld devices and being connected. And so there is this dialogue that's continuous between the government and its citizens that way. And in the future,
I really like this thing that we've been talking about today about the young people. If going on what you've said, the young generation is going to be more efficient in terms of energy consumption and behavior because they're more smart enabled. If I've joined the dots correctly, that's a really optimistic position, I think. But I mean, obviously there's a lot more detail than that. Can I just ask, so Ghassan, you've said across those metrics, 8 to 20% improvements depending on which city and what metric, you know, carbon emissions or emergency response times or commute times. And you touched on some of the technology. You mentioned water meters. What are the main areas, do you think, of technology that we can lever to deliver these gains?
Well, you know, it's all the different sort of applications that are being developed. And this is a really important point, Richard, that, you know, becoming a smart city is not something that only the government is responsible for. It's very much a joint effort between the public sector, the private sector, and the citizens. And, you know, cities which scored best are those deploying the greatest number of applications overall. and moving forward on all domains, on the health sector, education, retail. You can see nowadays through COVID that some of these trends have been accelerated, and reliance on technology for getting all these services done online has become really imperative. So the global leaders like New York, Los Angeles, London, etc., they score very high, and the citizens and the private sector's contribution to make is about, we estimate, is about 60% of the investment that's needed. So the public sector and the government will provide the foundation and the hard wiring, but all the software and the adoption and how you use it is all down to the private sector and the citizens. And the younger, the more tech enabled, the more tech savvy the population is, the higher that the adoption and the benefits that they will get out of it.
Excellent. Thank you, Ghassan, for that. I'm delighted to say that Mohammed, who is IT and Smart City Director from Knowledge Economic City in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed has been able to join us. I know we've had some problems with your video, Mohammed, so thank you very much for persevering. Can I just check, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. Great to be with you guys. Sorry we had some issues that we had to try and resolve.
No, that's fine. Thank you. And I apologize to you, but thank you very much for your perseverance. So we've just been talking really about some of the drivers of smart cities, and the benefits of using technology to improve the way cities function. What is your experience? Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Knowledge Economic City in the first place. Not everybody will know of that economic city. And then what are your experiences of what's been driving the development of the city in terms of its performance and smartness?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. From our point of view, we have city 6.8 million square meters of land, which is a greenfield. One of the key drivers is to build an infrastructure that allows us to be smart city ready. Focusing on is providing the right telecommunication and connectivity layer under the ground.
Can you hear me?
Did you hear me?
I think we lost you for just a moment there. You might have to repeat the last 20 seconds.
Yeah. I was saying that we have 6.8 million square meters of land. It's a greenfield development, and our focus has been on the infrastructure, building the right smart city infrastructure to enable the development. Did you get that?
Got that.
Great.
And then what about looking forward? So I was going to, we've had a question that has come in about business opportunities. Yep. So this is a MEED conference, and a lot of the MEED audience is interested in contracts and projects and business opportunities. So I'll start with you, Mohammed. So if you've described very quickly the past, going forwards, how do you see sort of money being spent in terms of infrastructure and technology to enable your city and other cities to grow and to operate more effectively?
Well, I think there's two steps. There's one is the design, where contractors and consultants can get involved with smart city developments, yeah. And then there is the actually implementation process. Now, typically between design and implementation, there is a gap, yeah. And I think that's where consultants need to engage with prospects.
So that kind of bringing in the downstream element, the contractors and the operators and the users into the early stage planning and design.
Yeah. And because there's basically two steps. There's two steps, and there's a gap in between. Between design and implementation. And
so on your side, so if I understand correctly, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. So you're the IT and Smart City Director of Knowledge Economic City. So as I don't know if it's correct to call you the municipality, but as a city operator and as the person responsible for the tech side of it, do you find that you are being engaged by your procurement departments in terms of infrastructure planning and, you know, thinking of what you just said there about thinking about 20, 30 years down the line?
Yeah, we are involved in the procurement side of it through the actual design. So what I do in my role, and I think this is a role for other technologists in a real estate environment, is that we get involved with the architectural team or the urban planners, and we wear the digital design hat. Yeah. So during the design stage, we identify ways of using digital smart technology, yeah, to fulfill the objectives, either from an urban design point of view or from an individual development point of view. Okay, yeah. So we build that technology blueprint into the design process. And in the development cycle, you have conceptual design, you have schematic design, and then you have detailed design. After detailed design, then real estate and construction organization put out to tender for vendors. Yeah. And that is where the vendors can engage with the specific solutions. Now, if a vendor is strategic, he will try and get involved with the client early on in the design stages, whether conceptual, schematic, or detailed. Yeah.
It's an interesting trend. So throughout today's conference on smart construction, this idea of collaboration and relationships, it comes up again and again and again, whether we're talking at the city level or the construction level. Okay, Mohammed, thank you for that. I want to come to Martin now with the same question, really. But just before I do, I'm getting a little bit of feedback or background noise. I'm not sure if it's coming from me or one of the others. If I could ask the panelists to if you can put your microphones on mute when you're not speaking, just to see if that, maybe it's just me, but I can hear quite a lot of background noise. Martin, if I can come to you, this question about EPC contracts. So the question that was, in business terms, what is in it for EPC companies and what should be their next move and what is the potential? So from a sort of planning cities and projects coming and how companies should prepare their skills and their offering, what should people be thinking about?
Okay, so, well, from my side, it's I think traditionally when we've been planning our cities, we've tended to rely on the solid core of disciplines such as the highway engineers, the road engineers, the structural engineers, and maybe the urban designers and the planners have been sort of kept to one side, or perhaps that collaboration hasn't been as strong as it could have been. I think now that that wall has well and truly been broken down. So there is a much more collaborative approach now between the different disciplines to be able to deliver on projects such as the economic city. These kind of projects will require a full workforce of not just engineers, but also planners and designers, and even, you know, you can go even further. I've seen some of the projects I've worked on where you've brought in, where they've brought in artists, for example. You know, there's a full range now of disciplines that are brought in. In fact, when I left the UK, I know that we had historians being brought in to make sure that the concept, the idea of the scheme that was being brought in had some reflection of the past of the area as well and reflected the culture. And I think you see that a lot more now than, say, 10 years ago. So for me, that's the big difference in terms of the resources and the staff levels that are coming in. And just from my own personal point of view, when I'm recruiting for my own team, you know, I'm not restricted to just engineers. I keep an open mind to the staff that I'm looking to bring in to see how they're going to add to the overall mix of a project that we're working on.
Thank you very much. And then I'm going to come to you, Dan, with the same question. So you are Vice President for Major Projects, Capital Projects and Infrastructure. So this question about for contractors, for EPC companies, where is the money going to be spent? You know, where are their next business opportunities coming from in terms of smart cities? And I guess in a brief bit of McKinsey's consulting, what should their strategies be?
I think obviously in terms of the spending on CapEx, particularly on new cities, it's for you know, new real estate developments, or even new cities like Knowledge Economic City in Saudi, or NEOM, for example, or expansion of the existing cities, like greenfield projects where we're putting in new infrastructure. So a lot of the, if you like, the pipes and wires that are needed to make the city smarter, and the metering and the technology that's embedded within it will be on these new greenfield projects. I think as we discussed earlier, for existing cities and particularly those you know, well-established cities, it's all about improving the operational efficiency. So some of that will be looking at the existing infrastructure and how we can modernize it, how we can, if you like, put in the wiring and the instrumentation that's needed, and the metering, so that we can monitor, you know, how efficiently it's being utilized, and I'll try and improve on the utilization there. So I think they need to be, depending on where you are, my advice to engineering construction players is they need to adapt into how much they do in terms of new construction, how much they do in terms of the operation of existing assets. And they maybe need to shift in terms of their business into the OPEX, as you know, as well as the CapEx, and not purely concentrate on new build.
That's interesting. It mirrors the kind of narrative around the region generally. You know, we've had 20, 30, 40 years of growth, which is based on capital spending and government spending. And then as oil prices become weaker, it's about productivity, and what it sounds like that's the story that you're also passing on to contractors. It's not just about building things.
Yeah, and the other dimension to this, because the impact that technology is having on cities and on infrastructure, you know, which is also highlighted by COVID. The switch, for example, to e-commerce or e-learning, or, you know, people working from home, it's having a huge impact on the transportation systems that we're having, a different switch, you know, and modality in terms of transportation. And also, you know, there's a need to repurpose a lot of the hard infrastructure that's already in place in cities. You know, there will be maybe less need for car parking in the future, multi-story car parks, etc., or even surface parking. And what do we do with this space in cities? It's valuable space. How can we utilize it for other purposes? Similarly, if there's less need for offices and commercial, because more people will be working from home, how do we repurpose some of this real estate for the change in needs? And how do we make homes also more suitable or friendly for people to work from home? And, you know, if the shopping centers, if the high streets, you know, are no longer going to be utilized, you know, for shopping, how can we repurpose the high street or the shopping malls for the impact of e-commerce? And the same for e-learning. There's a lot of repurposing. You know, there's trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure just in the Middle East here, which need to be rethought and reimagined, and you know, also in terms of construction, needs to be rehabilitated or upgraded to reflect the impact that technology is having on cities.
Just on, on that point, you talked about transport infrastructure. So over the past decades, and particularly about 5 years ago, there was a lot of talk and investment going into metros. You know, the need to get cars off the road, get people onto metros. I just wonder, from what you said there, is the metro conversation gone now, and we're now talking about autonomous vehicles and working from home? And I mean, do you? It's maybe a bit of an unfair question at short notice, but is the metro era over? We've now moved on to something more fragmented.
I think the mass transit systems are still needed, and I think also, you know, that the use of, say, shared rides in terms of whether it's autonomous vehicles or, you know, using hail riding, but with shared transport, or will reduce the demand for private cars on the roads, and therefore will reduce the demand for car parking. There'll also be a shift in the transportation mode, and maybe less pressure on the commuter lines, because people will be sort of working from home or traveling at different times of the day to the office to meet people, rather than just to be there at 9 o'clock, everybody to be there at the same time. So definitely the need for mass transit will still be there, but the way that it's employed, or the demand for it at different times of the day, and the modality mix between say mass transit systems and say autonomous vehicles or shared riding in taxis or Ubers or whatever, will have an impact on private car ownership for the better. As the infrastructure also develops in terms of having more electric vehicles, you'd need the infrastructure to be able to charge the vehicles around town. And if you're going to use autonomous vehicles, you need to also upgrade in terms of 5G networks. So all this will create more work. So technology is impacting the hard infrastructure as well as people's behaviors. So contractors need to be adaptive to think about these trends and move where the technology is leading.
Could I just jump in on that point, because I thought Hassan raised a really good point, and I think that just to follow on from that is the adaptability of our transport networks. So what Hassan was saying there, that it's quite possible there'll be reductions in metro usage. One is the element of trust. Do people trust going back into public transit after coronavirus? Do they feel that they can go on and still be safe going in there? And that's something that we as transport planners need to make sure that people understand. But then it's the adaptability of.
Is it too early to say, or do you think
there's ways that you can? No, I think people have. Yeah, I think right now people are much more nervous to use public transit than pre-virus, for sure. But what can we do? I mean, there's measures about advertising that the stations, the trains are being sanitized, that everyone is ensuring that they're wearing masks, but and maintaining the social distance. But that's still a long way to go before people feel totally comfortable to going back in as it was pre-virus. But my point was going to be about the adaptability of the networks. So, for example, there are cities around the world that their bus system can also be adapted to use to move freight. So we talked about the e-commerce, the ability of a bus system to actually adapt in off hours to move goods around a city is quite a nice idea. Adapting some of the carriages of a train to carry goods around is another way forward that we can start to adapt. In London and in Paris, they looked at adapting the roadway, where the road traffic had reduced significantly. They changed the road surface over. They put temporary pop-up cycle lanes. So for me, this is one of the big changes with post-virus, is the adaptability of the transport network. How can we change it? One thing is changing car parks for other uses and malls, but how do we change our transport network for the better to adjust for the way that we are going to operate going forward?
Thank you very much, Martin. Mohammed, I want to put the same point to you. So as somebody who's involved in the actual operations and running of a city, how has your long-term planning around transport, we've just been talking on a range of things there, from road surfacing to autonomous vehicles to metros to ride-sharing services to cycling. How does all of that how has all of that changed your thinking, or your company's thinking, looking ahead for the next 10 years?
For us, the important thing is that when we design the city and when we design certain developments and sub-neighborhoods, the traffic impact analysis is very important. And the consulting team that works on traffic and really focuses, whether it's mass transit or on-demand transit, they break that down into great detail with numerous scenarios. So one is doing effective design, because if we can design right, that's the biggest saving for the development and the biggest gain for the people that will be in that community. So one part is design. The other part is that we try and see how we can use technology, to improve flow. Yeah. So that's movement of different forms of traffic, whether it's individuals, it's goods, it's passenger traffic. That way, what we get in return is a more efficient flow from a traffic point of view, and also critically, we lose less valuable land on these transiting locations, widths of roads, widths of lanes. And as my colleagues have been saying, I think another critical part is this golden word of flexibility. Yeah, COVID has really turned our worlds literally upside down. I think nobody ever sort of really truly engineered and designed for pandemics. We thought it was something from science fiction, not from science. Yeah, and I think it's very important now moving forward that we always have this adaptability. Car lanes can be bike lanes, very simple. You can improve the traffic there. People movement, social distancing. There's people even talking about vehicles and others having distancing, in terms of strategic design. So I think we have to take that into account. And again, using the technology for enforcement, because there's no point designing things if you don't have the ability to enforce, because that's what actually gives you the behavioral change and gives everybody that comfort that people are following the rules. And I think, the other thing will come up is more and more smartphone-based technologies, apps will come available that will help you to share resources. It'll be the Uber of all things. Yeah, it's not just car riding. It may be lane sharing, traffic slots, different time zones, different types of traffic coming on certain lanes at different times of the day, and really keeping the community engaged and informed of those flexible opportunities.
Theme, Mohammed, around smartphones and the sort of the volume of data and data applications, that sort of plays into the 5G narrative. And how enabled is Knowledge Economic City with 5G, masts and data centers? And is that quite a critical part of your planning, or is that done from some other location?
Again, going back to the infrastructure design, it has to be flexible enough to take these innovations into account. So we've got locations, mobile GSM connectivity, and bringing in harnessing the capability of 5G, and then bringing that into individual developments to make sure that the signal is moved around effectively with what we call the ISBs, in-building solutions. Yeah, to make sure that in a large tower or mixed-use development, you get the value of that 5G. 5G, of course, will make big differences in the IoT as well, because those devices will be able to communicate more data in a more efficient, accurate, real-time perspective. So you almost have a city management dashboard in understanding changes and flows. I don't know, God forbid, there's a fire in one building, you suddenly see a movement of people, you change the traffic priorities, you bring in the emergency services and first responders more effectively. So again, in flexibility, 5G gives you that extra capability of doing things faster.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got 10 minutes remaining on this panel, and it's a fantastic panel. We've touched on so many issues. I have a couple of questions here, but if you do have questions for our panelists, please send them in right now, because we've only got 10 minutes. And then I want to get as many sort of issues on the table as we can. Now, Havoy, you've been silent for quite a long time, so I'm going to focus on you for a bit. Now, Ghassan was talking there, he touched in his comments about consumer trends, and that actually is one of the questions that has come in about how do changing consumer trends, the shift to e-commerce and other sort of changing consumer patterns, how will that affect our smart city planning?
Before I answer that, I just wanted to really jump back a little bit, and one of the points that was raised, because I think that what the fascinating thing is, and Martin mentioned making data available. Ghassan talked about collecting all the data. Mohammed talked about putting the infrastructure in to have the data there. I think that, to me, is the fundamental, element here, because I think that what we are, or at least in my experience, what I've seen in the Middle East is that we've got quite a long way to go until we make that available, until we actually understand that, and in turn, having that to help us to apply those KPIs that Ghassan talked about, to actually, start monitoring usage behaviors, etc. Look, I think that we're talking about cities, right? And I think that we have seen consumer patterns, and I think that consumer patterns is all about kind of carrot and sticks, right? And it's ultimately all about incentive. And what I'm particularly interested in is the incentivization of certain behaviors that we think are beneficial to the overall systems, whatever have you. So I think that in the way that I believe that the cities will evolve, and Ghassan gave a great kind of overall perspective of where some of those areas are going. I think that the one thing we shouldn't underestimate is how quickly we flip back into business as usual, because I think that this is just one of those human nature things. We tend to forget the bad and remember the good, right? So in a lot of the situations. So I think that this is where you hear a lot of these kind of don't let a good crisis go to waste scenario. This whole element around, although online retail is here to stay, what is here to stay as well is the people are interested in other people. So nobody's going to want to be living in their little bubble and just have drones deliver all of the stuff to them. I think that if I can see one thing, I think that we're starting to see a little bit of a social media backlash already, because we're starting to see what negative impact the over-reliance on social media for social interactions is actually providing. And I don't know about you guys, these things are great, but I love meeting new people and actually having conversations one-to-one, because it's much easier to get involved in all of those things. So I think that in terms of the consumer behaviors, I think that, or at least I would hope that something like COVID is going to help us to see some of the trends that I have seen be exacerbated. And this is some of those things that come around, it's overriding the term. I appreciate that.
That's an interesting point. I mean, it's obviously 8-9 months is a relatively short period, although it feels like it's gone on forever. I mean, has anything stood out to you that has changed your thinking or made you think, actually, that's going to be a more important trend than I realized, 1 year ago? What is, you mentioned, for example, there about e-commerce. Have there been some surprises?
I think that the one thing that really, and this is projecting now, and I think that the one thing that I'm really seeing is this yearning for social interaction, right? And I think that maybe that's a little bit too early, where we'll actually start seeing the negative impacts that this COVID thing has had. I mean, I personally had a fairly blissful kind of lockdown in that way, because I live in a big house and I've got lots of kids that are keeping me entertained throughout the day. But I had people in the team, for example, that have a different experience, right? They live in a 1-bedroom apartment. They haven't got anybody to interact with. I was just talking to a friend in Germany who was talking about, like, one of his employees is now going into 3-week hard lockdown and he can't travel home. He's literally not seen many people or any of his loved ones in a year. And I think that this is where technology is great, because it provides us with a kind of stopgap, but I think that it does not replace the real deal. And I think that that's something why I'm fairly positive around, I guess that you mentioned high streets and malls. I think that absolutely the offering will change within that. But it is, the ability to be able to, go and have your stuff delivered to you is going to be great. But me personally, I'm still tactile. I'd like to see a T-shirt before I buy it. Certain things I don't really care about. So TV is a TV, so I can have that delivered. But I think that one of those things that we're talking about, the experiential elements of it, is definitely something that I think it's just going to be, turbocharged because of this COVID thing.
Okay, we've got 5 minutes remaining, so I'm going to step in at that point. I want to quickly go around each of you and talk about challenges. So we've had a really good discussion about the drivers and the benefits and the opportunities from smart cities. What are the challenges? Ghassan, if I can start with you, just if you can keep it to a sort of minute or so, where do you think the barriers to success are?
I think it's all about adoption, really. I think we have to encourage the private sector and citizens to believe that this is for them. You know, a lot of people are reluctant for various reasons to adopt, and so the challenge is how to get the 60% of the investment that's needed to make the city smarter. And we can only do that by convincing people and demonstrating that this has a positive effect on their livelihoods and on their quality of life, and etc. So to me, it's all about citizen engagement, that technology is just a means to an end. And by connecting citizens to the governments and the people who represent them in real time, and to make governments more responsive to their needs, be it social needs or economic needs, etc., that can only be for the better.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed, if I can come to you, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing you as somebody who's involved in rolling out and delivering a smart, modern city? What are the barriers?
I think the barrier is, it reminds me of Star Trek, you know, smart cities, smart construction, smart real estate, smart communities is what Captain Kirk says, that we will go where no man has gone before. Yeah. So we're at the really, I don't know, super bleeding edge, or whatever you want to call it, of innovation. And I think what get customers and vendors to work strategically, yeah, and bring proof of concepts, so we can begin to educate those communities, consumers. You know, it's a bit like Steve Jobs when he invented the iPhone. He had this vision, but he didn't really have a prototype, and people took it. You know, so we need to bring these proof of concepts so the average man on the street, the average consumer can understand the value. Then they will push for that change to their communities. They will drive the vendors to do more research and bringing these technologies closer to market. So to me, I think vendors and customers need to get together strategically and have simple, practical proof of concepts ready for people to understand.
Thank you for that, Mohammed. Martin, where do you see the challenges?
So for me, I think one of them is privacy. You know, you may see a backlash as more and more information is required for smart cities, and the public being asked to give more and more information. You know, you can see examples of it even with the Trace and Track app, for example, where people were quite reluctant to give their details in, even though this was for everyone's benefit. And I can see that the smart city has some hurdles to overcome in convincing people that this is a good idea. And then on the other hand, I want to balance that with security, whereas smart cities really can enhance security and make the cities a much safer place through things like facial recognition technology. So for me, it's the balance between privacy and security. And I don't have the answer for it, because I think this is one that is going to be, this is going to be an eternal balancing act, I'm afraid, going forward.
Okay, that's great. And Hafwa, you've got 30 seconds, probably less. What's the biggest challenge?
In the Middle East, it's data collection, management, and making it available.
Very good. Good answer. Well, good because you kept it short. Equally good in terms of quality to everyone else. That brings us to the end of this fantastic panel. I have to say, I really enjoyed that, and thank you very much to the four of you, Hafwa, Ghassan, Martin, and Mohammed, for your time, for your insights. A very good discussion. And finally, thank you to you, the audience, for being with us today. I hope you found it valuable, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody, and see you next time. Thank you very much.